Hi everyone, welcome back to the Harbinger podcast. Today we have joining us Tiger Fang, who is co-founder and CEO at Kargo Technologies, a Jakarta-based startup that aims to digitize trucking and freight logistics in Indonesia before expanding to other markets in Southeast Asia. Kargo counts among its investors Sequoia Capital, ZhenFund, Intudo Ventures, ATM Capital, Coke, as well as Uber co-founder Travis Kalanick. Kargo recently raised $31 million in Series A, led by Tenaya Capital. With Tiger, we cover his journey over the past decade, initially as managing director at Lazada Thailand, before joining Uber to manage Western China and Indonesia as general manager. We then examine Kargo's solution, discuss how it incorporates into the logistics supply chain, how to develop route and pricing optimization, before shifting to competition and opportunity in this market, as well as the greater impact of China on Kargo and the entire Southeast Asia ecosystem. Hey, Tiger, thanks so much for joining us today on the Harbinger podcast. So you've been in Southeast Asia for nearly 10 years, and you've seen a lot of developments from the early days. So before we start talking about the company you founded, Kargo, could you share with us a bit more about your experiences to date and your story out in Southeast Asia?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Sure. I think the story goes back to 2008. Best time ever to be in finance, where I started my career in New York. I came to Southeast Asia, on a backpacking trip, and just really loved the vibe out here. And met a few folks that was working for Rocket Internet. Very, very sort of new on the scene, but connected with them. And over the next couple of months, decided to really interview for what they were trying to do, a Amazon clone here in Southeast Asia. So I came to Thailand with Lazada, right around maybe 2010. It took some time for me to finally get, sort of comfortable with the idea of moving to a foreign country and doing, a tech startup. And I was supposed to be head of their business intelligence unit. I was pretty good with Excel, had to use a lot of, financial modeling in my previous job. And when I got here, the first day I was told to go to the outskirts of Bangkok because our logistics was broken. And we needed to find and build a warehouse. And so I spent the next 3 months on the outskirts of Bangkok, really helping us set up our first warehouse. And I had known nothing about warehouse. I bought some, sort of books, Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh Zappos, and read online about Amazon. And, we just really started from scratch. And back then, there wasn't a lot of volume, right, in e-commerce in general. And so no one, had, an e-commerce fulfillment experience. So we really had to build everything from scratch. And I loved it. That was I think really crazy 3 months of my life. And we were doing a couple hundred orders a week, right? That was already completely overwhelming the logistics system in Thailand at the time. And so we thought about renting our own trucks. We thought about doing last mile delivery ourselves. And eventually Lazada will do that. They have this logistics, express system that they're building. But yeah, that was the sort of the first story about coming out to Southeast Asia. I really loved that 0 to 1 experience. After Lazada, I went to Uber. Uber had just raised a big round from Google, and it was expanding out here in Asia. So they had just launched in Singapore, and because I really love that sort of 0 to 1 experience, I signed up as a launcher where I met our friend Alan. Shout out to Alan. And we launched Malaysia. Then I launched Thailand, and then ultimately Indonesia in my first year at Uber. So this is sort of starting from scratch, going into a foreign country, a city, laying out the landscape, figuring out what type of product to bring, the pricing, and then ultimately hiring a team to really start the first operations of Uber in a specific country. So that was really cool. And at that time, China for Uber was still in a sleepy mode. We had just launched Beishang Guangshen, right? The 4 big cities, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Beijing and Shanghai with our Uber Black product, which is a limousine, very, very luxury, right? Thinking about Audi A6s and Mercedes. And this is the time where, China was really starting to think about its P2P, right? So this, more of the classic ride sharing as we know it today. And there was sort of a call to arms. It's like, hey, China's going to be a big thing. If you speak Chinese, come back. And that's what I did. I went to partially because I never worked in China. I was born there, but I left when I was very little. And also I just thought it was a great opportunity to learn how to speak Chinese. So I picked second tier cities in China where I knew that there wasn't going to be a lot of expats, where I really needed to be able to use my Chinese. So I started in Chongqing. Chongqing is a huge city, actually. It's the biggest city in the world by population. They say that, officially that city has 30 million people. And then I launched a lot of cities around Shanghai. So Nanjing, Suzhou, Ningbo. And ultimately, I ended up in Chengdu, looking after Uber in Chengdu as a city general manager, and then as Western sort of region manager of Uber China before the merger. And after the merger with DiDi, and there's a lot of action-packed sort of things that happened in that 2 years in China. I came back to Southeast Asia because that's where we all thought was going to be the next really fierce competition, with both Gojek and Grab. And I would be able to take a lot of the learnings, from China, especially against a very strong, well-capitalized local competitor, and really be able to execute that, in a place like Indonesia. So I came back, and then we also, obviously sold our business to Grab. And so I like to say that I was the only Uber manager that was sold twice, before finally starting my own venture, Kargo, here in Indonesia.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that context. It's fascinating how much you've done over those 10 years. And as you mentioned, essentially the beginning of the development of the Southeast Asia tech ecosystem is also quite quite a coincidence, and very interesting that you worked at both Lazada and Uber. Because in the US, there's a concept of the PayPal mafia. There's a number of co-founder executives went on to build some incredible businesses. And then, I noticed that for Uber, for example, there's a number of talent that left to eventually start their own companies, whether it's Alan at Beam, yourself at Kargo, and also Zhang Yanqi, who eventually went to OFO, who's their COO, and is currently working with Travis at Cloud Kitchens. So really fascinating development in this region. Shifting the focus to Kargo. So could you tell us a bit more about what Kargo is, or even before that, what got you to thinking about starting your own company and building something like Kargo?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Kargo was really a result of being at the right place at the right time. And I think a lot of it is for an entrepreneur. So, I had said that I worked in Uber China. We were really, really hard. And the result was, obviously I think a great sort of outcome for both DiDi and Uber, which was an eventual sort of merger. And then I came back to Uber in Indonesia. And when we had a great team. We had almost 150 people who were run rating maybe $100 million business in Indonesia, against, both Grab and Gojek. We had 100 people, but, I think just the size of our business, we were very efficient. The team was very tight knit. And, we were eventually sort of sold to Grab. And, we just really didn't feel that we were the masters of our own fate, or the masters of our own destiny, if you will. And so I think there was just that fire that, sort of you get, and that itch that you get. And so we were, at the end of that merger, we still all liked each other, working together. I think there was always sort of a chip on our shoulders to say that, hey, had we, done this ourselves, or had we gotten the resources and be able to lay out the strategy, I think there would have been a different conclusion to the story, right? Or to our previous story. And so I think that was where, the sort of the genesis. And then it was just really about, well, let's find an idea that we could all work on. And it was pretty hard to think of something to do after Uber, because here you have such a great growth story of such a massive impact that you'd be making in a city, and the overall success, right? Like this was the fast growing startup ever. And so it was really hard to figure out what can we, what do we want to spend our time doing? So we went down a list, so during the period between when we merged with Grab and we finally started Kargo, it was about 6 months. I took 6 months to really sort of, visit places where I probably didn't have the time. I took a motorbike ride, actually. I bought a motorcycle, and rode up from Ho Chi Minh all the way up to Hanoi. Actually, it took about 10 days. It was amazing. Traveled to a couple of second tier cities in Indonesia. Talked to folks about what is it like to live in a second tier city. Never been there before. And we thought about doing a cross-border e-commerce business. I actually bought like a couple $1,000s of watches because I thought we were gonna white label watches and import them from China to Indonesia to sell. And we looked at we looked at a lot of different possibilities, and I think trucking was one. Sort of there were big companies in the US, very successful sort of companies in the US and India and China really operating in this space. There were none in Southeast Asia and Indonesia. I spent time talking to big trucking owners, to truck drivers, to warehouses. I went to a couple of different sort of distributors of fast moving commodities, and just asked like, hey, how do you what are your problems? How do you sort of like book a truck? And so that all those type of conversations end up painting a picture that Indonesia, first of all, is one of the biggest markets for logistics. It spends 25% of its GDP, right? A quarter of its annual GDP on logistics, which is about $200 billion a year. There's 7 million trucks sold in the last 10 years, and 90% of these trucks are owned by small fleets of less than 10 trucks. So it's super fragmented. Not an ounce of technology, in sort of this entire ecosystem. People call up their local brokers. There's not a lot of transparency in the quality of service. You don't even know like where to go. If you Google like, hey, I want to rent a truck or I want to get a truck, you just really don't know where to go. And so everybody relies on, someone that knows someone in their local networks. And so what we find is that, from the actual owner of the cargo to the driver, sometimes there could be as many as 3 layers of brokers, each taking, a percentage, a cut. And so we thought, hey, this is an interesting idea. It's sort of related to, what we've done at Uber, which is to build a 2-sided marketplace, right? We've got to get these drivers trained to use our software. It's not cars, but it's bigger, right? It's trucks. So there's a lot of similarities. So we just thought this was probably the best opportunity that really fit our profile and our experience. And that was the start of Kargo. And by the way, and I'll go into this a little later, but we were completely wrong. Truck hailing and car hailing are nothing alike. And this is there's actually a lot of difference, but I'll go into that a little later.
Yeah, it's fascinating how large the logistics market is in Indonesia and how big of a portion of GDP it comprises. Could you tell us a bit more about this logistics market in terms of the supply chain and how Kargo fits in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, logistics is a huge space, and there's it's part of a supply chain. So there's what you just described is really a chain of different sort of services, and depending on the industry, obviously different industries touches different parts of that supply chain. So for example, when we think about importing and exporting, right? So a factory maybe in Bandung that manufactures fabric and exports it. There's picking it up from the factory, getting it onto a port, and then sort of delivering it into sort of a ship. That is one sort of industry or a segment that we could potentially target. We sort of took a very overview sort of look of the landscape and sort of mapped out like who are the players in last mile, how much capital have they raised, like what is the scale of their business, and we knew that was pretty hard to get into, especially as a startup that hadn't raised any funding. And so what we really came out with was, okay, well, who's doing sort of the mid-mile of the journey, right? And who's doing sort of the line hauls, the intercity from manufacturing plant to distribution hub. And we sort of that landscape seemed pretty uncompetitive. And who was doing sort of the first mile? So from port pickup, import and export, and to some of these warehouses. And that was pretty interesting as well. So we sort of looked at that, and then we looked at, well, what is the fragmentation of the market that's currently servicing that segment? Because I think in order for you to build a really valuable marketplace, you need to have extreme fragmentation on both ends, the supply and demand, right? And so we sort of zeroed in on FMCG because I think number one, FMCG just has a lot of volume. Indonesia has such a big consumer base. The Unilevers, the Coca-Colas of the world are, they have demand for thousands of, trucking, every single week. So we started focusing on that, and that's where we first started. So we went to these big FMCG enterprises, and we started servicing them and saying, hey, can you, do you need some trucking service? And then we went to a lot of the trucking companies that we met, and basically hooked them up with our software, with our app, and that's really how sort of Kargo started.
Okay. And Tiger, can you help us visualize the product, given that it pertains to both the supply side and the demand side? So the truckers and transporters as well as the clients. That'd be really helpful.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to visualize it is it's Uber for big trucks, big rigs, and instead of consumers to business. And a lot of the features that we've developed very much, were inspired by sort of how we thought about Uber and ride hailing, and we were very, very much mistaken. So I think I'll start with describing the sort of product that we offer to our customers, and then I'll sort of then go on and differentiate between truck hailing and car hailing. So I think this is a good opportunity to do so. So we sort of divide our marketplace to two parts. There's the shippers, who are basically folks that need to move their goods. And transporters, folks, logistics companies that own trucks, right? Because we don't own sort of trucks ourselves. And then obviously from the transporters, there's drivers, which is an important third sort of stakeholder in our ecosystem. What we offer to the transporters is an all-in-one sort of app that allows them to see all the available jobs that we have on the Kargo platform. And there is a bidding system, which they can say, hey, I want to take this job at this price, or I will bid and I will give you a price that I can take this job. And once that bid is won, then he is able to assign that job to the fleet of trucks that is registered to him. We target small, medium-sized trucking companies. So the average size of a trucking company on our platform has about 10 trucks. And we think that that's a good number because, in order to service the folks like big enterprises, you really need a lot of, SLA to make sure that you can service, these guys that have very, very high standards and sort of timeliness, right? So that's the product on the supply side. On the demand side, we have basically a dashboard and enterprise login system that allows the procurement team or the warehouse team, in these enterprise, in these companies to sort of log in, and be able to book a truck. And when it's, we try to provide 100% fulfillment when they book through our system. And when there's a booking, that booking is then, completely 100% sort of trackable in real time with our driver app. So that's the only thing that sort of gives it the Uber-esque feel. And at the end of this, we will be responsible for all of the billing. This is a huge part that we, never have to really deal with Uber because at Uber because we, did everything in cash or it's sort of, done with a credit card or any sort of wallet, digital wallet. Here we have to make sure that we gather all of the documents, and the documents has to be, very, very pristine. It needs to be coupled with their invoices, and then the invoicing is very, very specific to each enterprise level customer. And then we have to essentially build and invoice the customer to get paid back, in whatever terms of payment that we have struck with each enterprise customer.
So a couple of things to work through. So, first of all, you mentioned that there's a couple of different stakeholders, your clients, you have the transporters, and also the drivers themselves. Is there any reason you work through the transporters versus the drivers directly, which would almost seem to be a bit more of a Uber type model?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it really depends on the structure of ownership of the industry, right? And so I think in a place like Indonesia, a big container truck costs maybe anywhere between $50,000 to $100,000, depending on if you want to buy new or used. The drivers, a lot of times just don't have the capital and the credit to be able to purchase something like that. We see that with smaller trucks. Trucks that do the last mile, maybe the driver is the owner. But that's actually one of the biggest difference between the markets, between a China and a US versus here. There's just not a lot of what we call independent operators, right? So the drivers who also own the trucks that are operating in the space. And so when you start doing, these really big and heavy equipments, and we sort of like to do these big, what we call Tronton wing box. They're called wing box because the sides of their truck opens up like wings of a bird. There's just not a lot of, we actually haven't come across any, size or any truck of that size that was owned by the driver. And so, we choose to obviously work with these small, medium-sized trucking companies instead.
Makes sense. And also just getting a better sense there on the supply side of the trucking or the trucks. Do you help equip the transporters and their trucks with any hardware or fleet management tools to help you run analytics?
Yep. So we connect, if they have, these Fleetmatics tools, we will, integrate with them. So we have APIs that are able to take a lot of that information, and that if that's the information that one of our customers or shippers require, we can send that to them. But most of the time, these trucking companies, have Android phones actually, and I think that's the biggest difference between starting Kargo in 2019 versus Uber in 2014 is that smartphone penetration in the last 4 years have skyrocketed in places like Indonesia and a lot of places in Southeast Asia. And so these truckers have these very $30, $50 Oppo, Vivo, Xiaomi phones. It's pretty incredible. And they can, download our software into their phones, and the phones function as a GPS sort of tracking device. So we've been really leaning into that. And the data that we collect in real time, gets back to obviously, our customers. But I think it's really up to the customers, Adam. So if someone, for example, requires that you need to have a state-of-the-art GPS system that's linked to making sure that doors are unlocked, sensors on doors, because you have really high value commodities that you want to transport, that's a requirement that we put into that order. And we will only sort of display this job to our trucking partners, right? To trucking companies that we work with that have that requirement. So it's really that, this is where sort of technology comes in. Instead of a guy calling, all these trucks asking, do you have this? It's just, it's already marked, it's already tagged. These are features that's required, and we sort of, play matchmaker between what's out there in terms of available supply that can service this type of demand.
Yep. That makes sense. Now I was thinking with some of the Fleetmatics, what do you do in terms of route or pricing optimization? And how does that pertain to some of the stakeholders on your platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So pricing is something that I think about a lot, because this is one of the major difference between long haul trucking versus, sort of an Uber, even a Holala Lala move, in sort of doing intracity, because doing intracity is much easier to standardize, right? Because you can have
Yeah.
essentially a per kilometer per, volumetric sort of cost to operations. But in these long haul trucking, you're going from a very desolate place, maybe in a manufacturing plant, to another city, but it could be miles, right? It could be kilometers away from the city center, in some other industrial area, that you have to deliver it to, not to count all of the different tolls. You got to maybe go on a ferry, so it's very hard to standardize prices,
Mm-hmm.
and this is again dealing with such a fragmented sort of supply base. In Indonesia, on our system, there's 20 different types of combinations between truck heads and trailers. And so, the trailers are like flatbeds, you got box, you got reefers, you got, tons of different things, and different items and different goods has to be moved in different, sort of boxes. And sometimes it could have a different box per head. Proper pricing for all of this takes a lot of time and effort. And
Yep.
traditionally, a broker, says, "Hey, I only do this specific type of truck," right? And that's how we started. But I think the technology we're able to do is obviously, when we broadcast all of these jobs onto our marketplace, and when we get live bidding system, we're actually harvesting data on every type of goods being moved in the entire country during different times, because seasonality also plays a big role, and in different truck types. And so we
Yep.
harvest this data, and we sort of triangulate a price between what we think is the cost to serve, what is the availability of supply on our platform that can serve this specific route today, as
Mm-hmm.
well as sort of what historical prices has been, factoring in supply and demand and different seasonality. And so pricing is actually one of our secret sauce, and the pricing sort of algo that gets better over time is because we're getting all of these data points feeding into the algorithm, that builds essentially a live real time, route by route, truck by truck type price index, if you will, of
Mm-hmm.
of all freight that happens in Indonesia.
Right. So it's really helpful to understand that pricing mechanism and indexing system. Shifting the focus more to the client side. So, from their perspective, why do they want to work with Kargo? What is the value proposition and differentiation that Kargo provides to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So normally a big enterprise, they have to work with a set of carriers or transporters that perhaps have served them over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because of sort of how trucking works in Indonesia, a company, an enterprise can at most be able to work with a dozen sort of trucking companies, because the process is very manual. They have to call them. They have to make sure that the truck is available, and they have these tender process, every couple of years or so. And
Mm-hmm.
to be able to really open up their job to all the trucking companies out there is a really hard endeavor, because number one, you don't know them, you don't know their sort of standards and safety and sort of quality, and number two, you just don't
Yeah.
have enough manpower to be able to call up every single trucking company every single time. So I think
Yeah.
for us, what we say to a vendor, you have let's just say 10 trucking companies dedicated to you, right? Maybe there's another 20 trucks dedicated to Unilever, and so between two of them, they have 200, they have 30 sort of trucking companies, right? But if you really mismatch their routes and put all of their demand, on a map, a lot of times there could be a lot of overlaps. And so really between the two of them, if we schedule it right, they probably only need 20 trucking partners between the two of them, right? And so that saves, them, cost. And if we're
Mm.
able to get these 20 trucks to be able to do more trips, right, more sort of loads every single week, these truckers like earn more money, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's the whole sort of like on a macro level, I think what a platform like us can do at scale. So we came in and we said, hey, look, let us do some of, let us be a trucking partner for you, right? We have a whole marketplace. You test us out and you sort of, see if we're up to par. And normally an enterprise level customer will throw you, they're really bad routes that nobody wants because it's going to some, like some tier 16 city, right? And it's really hard for them to bring to get a trip back. And so most of these transporters really reject them. We happily take it and we give them great service, and we give them, real, all of the sort of features that I talked about, right? And we say, and we do it with a smile, like ear to ear, right? And I think they like that service, and then they asked us to become, more of their routine transporter. So they asked us to bid on some of their routes, and we did. And we were able to provide, some real cost savings to them. Again, the technology piece that really digitizes, their entire process. It takes a lot less effort to be working with us than, a traditional player. I think they really bought into that vision. But because of that working relationship we have with them, we ended up bringing Coca-Cola, Amatil as a strategic investor into our last fundraise round. And so that's a relationship that we hope to have with many of our enterprises. And the key thing is that these enterprises are international by nature, right? And so it's very easy for any of these folks to say, hey, look, you've done such a great job for us in Indonesia. Can you provide some of the same service or this level of standard service or technology to our operations in Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar? And that's something that we hope to do in the future.
Yeah. And I think the potential of a regional play is certainly, quite interesting, and certainly to investors that, want to help back large regional players. Getting back to your clients for a bit, so have a better sense of, who they are and how they work with you and the value there. What is your business model and how do you make money from them?
Yep, absolutely. So, I think at the very sort of simple terms, we match make a client that needs a truck, and if that truck sort of load costs $100, we try to find someone that can fulfill it for 90, right? And so we take our aim at scale is to take roughly a 10% sort of take rate. It depends on the route. It depends on the industry. Right? It's easier to take a 10% sort of take rate from, a more infrequent sort of shipper than someone like a Unilever that has, thousands of, volume, right? Every single day. And so it really depends on, the route, depends on the type of goods as well, right? So a fast moving sort of CPG versus cigarettes, for example, right? The margin profiles are different. So on average, our platforms tries to take a 10% sort of take. That's the beginning, right? So today we have about 10,000 trucking companies registered on our platform. There's also a lot of need for these medium-sized and small-sized enterprises. And so I think making us prove ourselves as value to these guys earns us the privilege to be able to, sell ancillary services to them. So if we look at top spends of what these trucking companies spend their money on, it's, things like financing, it's of their trucks, it's things like toll, right? Going onto all of these highways, it's gasoline, maintenance, tires. And so there's a lot of things that, we hope to get to eventually, right? As we, obviously become bigger in scale and then be able to bring almost, all of these folks onto our platform, then I think there's a real opportunity to be able to provide a lot of these value-added services to them.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I suppose, with your access to a lot of the trucks on the supply side, for the aggregate supply side, you should probably be able to access some better rates, whether it's on fuel or other types of financing. So it seems like you have a direct relationship with the clients and the other guys, and they're paying you directly. Given that, I wonder, is there an opportunity down the road for you to build up your own fleet And in that case, you could have a better control over the margin profile?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's something that, what do we think ourselves as, right? Because I think we want to be a platform, we want to be an aggregator, and we want to be asset light. And I think that is the business model that that we sort of set ourselves down the path of. Will there be an opportunity for us to, operate? Maybe, but I just don't think that's our core competence, right? Like, if we want to be a global player, and I think our ambition is to be able to, scale, our operations team, our technology into other markets. Does owning trucks is that a better in, sort of return on invested capital, right? So I would, first ask that question. And then secondly, I think there's a lot that goes into operating a fleet in a place like Indonesia, right? We have to hire drivers and maintenance of these trucks. These are just not our core competence. And so we want to partner with folks who, that's their core competence, right? And we want to be the technology layer. We want to be the value added service layer. We want to be, the sort of marketplace and sort of giving them jobs. And we want to make sure that their operations are more efficient through technology. I think that's our core competence. I think we're going to stick to our core competence for now.
Yeah, makes sense, and completely understand the focus and also the kind of doubling down your competitive advantages or capabilities. Could you share a bit more about the competitive landscape broadly? Hear about companies such as whether it's Wear6 in Indonesia or another one called Retace, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Could you talk us through how they're positioned and what they might focus on versus Kargo?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, this is a $200 billion sort of industry that I think we're all the folks that you mentioned are sort of on the mission to really digitize this, cut out the middlemen, and really be able to apply technology to a very sort of antiquated industry. And so I think a lot of times we're sort of on that journey together. I think between all of us, even if we just add up all of our marketing numbers of how many trucks we have access to, and I think there's some overlaps there, it's still less than a single percentage point, one or two percentage points of the total sort of trucks out there in the market. And so I think I think there's just a lot of room for collaboration, but also story sharing. I know most of the founders that you named, and so we're we're friendly in that I think there could be an association that's created to make sure that we are helping to give guidance to governments about how to regulate the space, how to encourage innovation, but more like data sharing as well, right? Like between all these different platforms, we really have a real-time read on what the economy of Indonesia is producing and consuming, and where could be the next big sort of infrastructure project to be able to build roads, because we see a lot of congestion at this specific point, right? And so I think there's a lot of room for collaboration. And I think all of us are tackling very different, as we started in the show, supply chain is a chain, and there's many different parts to this. So I think all of us are tackling very different sort of, chains and value proposition to the end client. So for example, we don't do warehousing, right? And we don't, today we're very focused on FMCG, but if someone else focuses on agricultural projects, we're just not going to be able to, we're not going to be stepping on each other's toes for a very, very long time. So that's how I think about it. I think, in every country that we mentioned, in the China, in the US, and India, there's a few players, all trying to tackle this space. And I don't think Indonesia is going to be any different.
Well, it certainly seems like we're in the early innings of this market development. I've also noticed that some of the players that we've mentioned have raised relatively large amounts of funding. And also Kargo has as well, right? Raised a $30+ million Series A recently. So big congratulations there. And in the midst of the coronavirus situation. So Tiger, could you please talk us through the fundraise and what it was like for you?
Yeah, I love to say that I saw it all coming, and we planned our Series A raise, directly because we had the timing of the virus down. But look, we were just very lucky. We went out for our fundraise in Q4, and it was already a tough environment because of this WeWork and sort of
Right.
there's a lot of jittery sort of in the market, and we were able to close earlier this year, so
Mm,
it was right timing, and we're very, very lucky and very fortunate. Thank the stars, for having sort of the ability to have the strongest balance sheet in this category in the region. And I think it's going to be much, much harder, in this time, in this, really sort of uncertainty, to be able to go out and raise money. So we're acutely aware of that, and I think, for us, is we've got to just use it wisely. So we've cut down our cost. We have cut salaries from every employee. I'm not taking salary for the rest of the for the next year, and we're putting it into a relief fund,
right.
that we're making, for truckers on our platform, because we see all of their volume start to come down. We're very lucky that we're functioning in a space that our business is still growing, because I think we do a lot of consumer staples, and no matter sort of the quarantine or staying at home orders, like, people still need to eat, people still need to drink water, and so those are the businesses that that we're still in, and so we're still lucky to be able to still work and be able to
Mm,
work from home. But most of these drivers, and a lot of folks aren't, on our operations team on the ground, are not. They have to be out there in the front lines. And so, I think the priority for us is just to make sure that they're taken care of, and that we do everything that we can, to make sure that our drivers stay busy.
understood. Well, congrats again on the fundraise. It's of vital importance to be in good cash position during this period. So and very admirable what you've been doing in terms of the relief fund and supporting a lot of the drivers and other folks in the community. So we've been talking about cargo for quite a while, and thanks for talking through a lot of the nitty-gritty details. It's super helpful. But just taking a step back and looking at Southeast Asia more broadly in terms of the startup ecosystem, capital flows and other developments. Given that you've been out there for many, many years, and worked on a number of startups, could you share a bit more about what you're seeing in terms of developments opportunities there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is the most exciting part of the world to me. I mean, I'm
Mm,
betting my career on it. I
yep.
moved to Indonesia full time 3 years ago. I have a place here. My family's here. And so, I think this is going to be the biggest growth driver of the global economy going forward. And I think Southeast Asia is just it's so dynamic. Every country is different. I think we think about regional expansion. We can't just say, hey, whatever's worked in Indonesia is going to work somewhere else, right? Like, we have to modularize, every part of our product and every part of our offering, and be able to say, hey, perhaps this piece is what a Thailand or a Vietnam or Philippines sort of needs, and so we're very open-minded to that. One sort of product solution is not going to be able to fit all, especially in logistics. I think every logistics sort of ecosystem is very different.
Mm,
But I think, yeah, I think this is super exciting. I think a lot of the macroeconomic issues about trade war, about the rising sort of China, really benefits this region, because I think this is where labor is still relatively sort of cheap compared to China. This is where there's massive opportunity to really upgrade the labor force of a place like Indonesia, to be able to be more competitive in the global supply chain. And this is, and I think all the governments in this region are really aligned towards that. They want to invest, in their, workforce. They want to be able to attract foreign investments coming in. I think, in a place like Indonesia, I'm a foreigner. My co-founder is a local Indonesian, but I feel like, a trucking startup like this can really, be successful in a place like Indonesia, right? Like, Indonesia is one of the few places in the world where the market is big enough, and the market size is attractive enough for investors, and it's opening its arms to foreign talent like myself, to be able to
mm,
go and found a company and be able to thrive in an environment where it's very competitive.
yeah. Um, Kind of shifting focuses a little bit. I'd like to ask about some more questions about the overall market. So not just Southeast Asia, but also China. It seems that there's quite a bit of interest in Southeast Asia from Chinese founders, investors, and the like. And there's quite a bit of influence also in terms of business models being, exported to other emerging markets and regions. So could you talk me through, and especially given your experience in both China and Southeast Asian markets, could you talk us through how you feel about the Chinese market and what it means for your company and the Southeast Asian ecosystem?
Yeah, huge. I think it's the simple answer here, because I think it's quite complex, the question that you're asking.
Yeah.
Look, we've seen models where Lazada circa 2012 was coming in and saying, hey, look, we want to be the Amazon, we want to be the Zappos of Southeast Asia, right?
Hmm.
And that's completely changed. People that I talk to today, even our company, when we go out and talk to investors, first thing you say, like, hey, are you like an FTA? Are you like a Mukbang? And I'm like, hey, yeah, that's interesting, right? So people recognize that Mukbang, over a Convoy or an Uber Freight. And I think that just goes to show the amount of influence that these huge Chinese companies that have completely dominate their home market and can be a profit center to be able to fund their international expansion. And
Mm.
so I think that's been a trend. We see a lot of people wanting to be the little red book of Indonesia, or they want to be tons of these Chinese sort of counterparts that have been very successful because I think the Chinese consumer, mobile first, right, consumption driven, brands driven, really sort of are like what the Southeast Asia consumer can relate to, and what investors and founders can relate to. So we definitely see
Mm.
that, right? Like even for e-commerce, what Rocket, what ended up supposed to be an Amazon, sort of an Amazon version of Southeast Asia, was acquired by Alibaba, and they people are saying like, hey, this should be the Taobao, or this should be the Pinduoduo of Indonesia. And even India in this case, right? Like, our investors, Sequoia, India, we get connected to a lot of their portfolio companies. And so there's a lot of sort of like cross-border sort of learnings from them as well. So
Yep.
hugely impactful. We're very grateful that we have some of the best, Chinese early stage investors, ZhenFund, ATM Capital, and they've been, extremely helpful in trying to help us navigate who could be potential partners from China, who are sort of the growth stage investors from China that are looking into logistics, and that's definitely something that I think we have a competitive sort of advantage over the others, in that I can speak Chinese, and I'm very comfortable in telling sort of our story here to investors that are looking to expand abroad,
Mm.
true high, or sort of Chinese sort of GPs, Chinese funds looking to invest overseas.
Yep. Definitely see that. And I mean, in terms of the dynamics between China and Southeast Asia, probably could have a separate podcast on that. But yeah, it does seem that for large scalable companies, such as Kargo, where there's a large addressable market, investment itself is a huge differentiator. The capital itself is a differentiator. And it does seem that the Chinese investors are quite familiar with this model, given that some of the companies that you mentioned. With their funds typically being a bit bigger, it could be a valuable source of capital down the road. This really early stages still, but even when I think about potential exits in Southeast Asia, which is of interest to GPs and their LPs, I think that's typically a question that's asked. What are some companies that go public, or what do the exits look like? Right, like there's probably like a couple of IPOs, but a number of acquisitions. I think some of the large Chinese companies could be potential acquirers down the road, similar to what Ali did with Lazada. And I'm sure there's plenty of other examples as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even Gojek and Grab is, some say it's sort of, if you look at their sort of cap tables, it is almost like a proxy war, right, between sort of the giants. And so it's been really, really interesting to sort of be able to meet some of the entrepreneurs that are thinking through who should I take money from, or who should I fundraise from, and if I do this, there's a signal that I can't take money from others. We're
Mm-hmm.
we're still lucky that we're still so small that we haven't had to we just got to focus on executing. But it's definitely an interesting perspective, and I think there's been some reports now that Facebook wants to get into, sort of some of these, more, e-commerce or payment related activities. And so, obviously it's been sort of a tussle between Tencent and Alibaba. But, it'd be really interesting to see how an Amazon or Google or Facebook, comes and really be able to compete on really neutral grounds, right? So this is where I think the China versus US sort of, technology giant sort of story, I think will come to life. So yeah, like I said, I'm very bullish on this region.
Tiger, thanks so much for your time. I know we talked through nearly an hour at this point. Really appreciate you sharing your insights on Southeast Asia ecosystem and also telling us a bit more about Kargo.
Absolutely. A great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Sure thing. Take care.